Story 1: The Proposal That Ended in Blood. The wind was crisp that February evening, carrying the scent of pine as Daniel knelt before his girlfriend, Mia, on the edge of Ravencliff. His heart pounded with excitement, the velvet box in his hands reflecting the fading hues of the sunset. Mia gasped, her hands covering her mouth in shock. "Mia Dawson," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Mia's eyes. Before she could answer, a sudden shout echoed through the cliffs. "Don't you dare say yes!" Both Daniel and Mia turned in shock. A man stood a few feet away, his face twisted in desperation, his hands clenched into fists. He looked rugged, like he had been searching for something for a long time. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel asked, stepping protectively in front of Mia. But the man wasn't looking at him. His eyes were locked on Mia. "You know exactly who I am." "Claire," he said. Mia flinched at the name. Her hands shook, and her breath came in ragged gasps. "You're mistaken," she whispered. "My name is Mia." The man let out a bitter laugh. "No, your name is Claire Bennett, and you disappeared 2 years ago, after murdering my brother." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "This is insane," he said, pulling Mia closer. "You've got the wrong person." The man stepped forward, reaching into his coat pocket. Daniel instinctively moved between them. "I have proof," the man growled, tossing a stack of photographs onto the ground. Daniel hesitated before picking them up. His stomach twisted. The photos were of Mia, or someone who looked exactly like her, but with slightly darker hair and a different style. In one, she was kissing a man Daniel had never seen before. In another, she was standing in front of a house he didn't recognize. Daniel looked up at Mia, his hands shaking. "What is this?" Tears spilled down Mia's cheeks. I don't know," she stammered. "He's lying." But the man wasn't done. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a missing person report. Claire Bennett disappeared after her fiancé, Matthew Carter, was found dead in their apartment, stabbed 17 times. Daniel's head spun. He turned to Mia, but she was pale, frozen in place. The man took another step forward. "She vanished that night. No traces, no clues. The police suspected her, but she was gone before they could arrest her." Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to believe Mia. He wanted to dismiss this as some terrible misunderstanding. But the terror in her eyes wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Mia suddenly turned and ran. "Mia, wait!" Daniel called, but she was already sprinting toward the dense woods beyond the cliff. The stranger chased after her. Daniel hesitated for only a second before running, his mind racing. Was this real? Had he been living with a woman who wasn't who she claimed to be? The chase led them deeper into the woods, branches whipping at their faces. Mia was fast, but the man was faster. He tackled her to the ground, pinning her down. "Get off me!" she screamed. Daniel caught up, panting. "Stop!" he yelled at the man. The stranger looked at Daniel, his eyes wild. "You have to believe me. She killed my brother." Mia thrashed under him, her voice turning eerily calm. "Let me go, Daniel." Daniel hesitated. That wasn't the voice of his loving, gentle girlfriend. That was someone else entirely. "Tell him, Claire," the man snarled. "Tell him the truth." Claire stopped struggling. Slowly, she smirked. "You're too late, Kevin." Kevin froze. "I was going to kill Daniel next," she said. "A fresh start. But you ruined that." Daniel's stomach twisted in horror. Kevin's grip tightened. "You won't run this time." A glint of silver caught Daniel's eye. Mia had a knife. Before he could react, she slashed at Kevin's arm. He howled in pain, rolling off her. Mia sprang to her feet and lunged at Daniel. "I would have made it painless," she whispered. Daniel barely dodged. The knife sliced his shoulder, pain searing through him. Kevin, bleeding but determined, grabbed a rock and slammed it against Mia's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground. Daniel tackled her, pinning her arms. "Who the hell are you?" he screamed. Mia laughed, a sound that chilled Daniel to his core. "You're just like him, you know," she said. "So trusting. So easy." Daniel felt sick. Sirens echoed in the distance. Kevin had called the cops before coming. Mia thrashed wildly, screaming. But it was over. The police arrived, weapons drawn. They arrested her, Kevin telling them everything. As they dragged her away, she turned to Daniel with a small smile. I really did love you. But Daniel knew now. She was never capable of love. The aftermath was brutal. News outlets ran headlines. Fugitive fiancé caught after 2-year hunt. DNA tests confirmed Mia Dawson didn't exist. Claire Bennett had changed her identity after murdering her fiancé. Daniel spent weeks trying to process the betrayal. Every kiss, every laugh, every moment. They had all been a lie. One day he received a letter. It was from Claire. I'll always be waiting for you, my love. Daniel burned the letter, but he truly felt safe. Story 2: The Stalker's Proposal. The first letter arrived on proposed day when Liana was 19. A plain white envelope with no return address slipped under the door of her dorm room. She almost didn't open it, thinking it was some random campus event flyer. But the message inside made her pause. One day, I'll kneel before you with a ring. I just need to make sure no one else gets in the way. There was no name, no signature. Just those chilling words written in neat, cursive handwriting. Her roommate, Sienna, laughed when she showed her. Some secret admirer? She teased. Honestly, it's kinda romantic. But Liana didn't find it romantic. She felt watched. And over the years, the letters kept coming. By the time Liana turned 23, she had almost convinced herself the letters were harmless. A weird but ultimately meaningless obsession. Then, on February 8th, 2 days before proposed day, she received another one. But this time, it wasn't just a letter. A small velvet box was inside the envelope. Inside the box was a silver engagement ring, the kind that looked old, worn down at the edges. The letter was shorter than usual. I think it's time. Don't you? Liana felt sick. She showed the letter to her boyfriend, Renzo, who immediately wanted to call the police. But what could they do? She had no idea who was sending them. No threats, no demands. Just promises. I don't like this, Renzo said. This guy has been watching you for years. Liana agreed. But what scared her most was the growing feeling that whoever was behind this wasn't just watching. He was waiting. And soon she would find out what for. Proposed day arrived, and Renzo insisted on staying with Liana all day. They had dinner at a quiet restaurant, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. Until she got home. The door to her apartment was unlocked. Did you forget to lock it? Renzo asked. No, Liana whispered. I never forget. A sinking dread filled her stomach as she pushed the door open. The apartment looked normal, but something was wrong. Then she saw it. On her bed was a single red rose, and next to it a photo of herself. Not an old photo, not something taken from her social media. A new photo, taken tonight. She was in the exact outfit she had worn to dinner. In the picture, she was laughing, looking at Renzo. The angle suggested it was taken from a distance, through a window. Someone had been following them. Her hands trembled as she picked up the note next to the rose. He doesn't belong here, Liana. It's time to choose. That night, Renzo refused to leave. He locked every door and window, double-checked everything. Around 3 a.m., Liana woke up to the sound of tapping. Not at the door, at the window. Her heart pounded. Slowly, she turned her head. Outside, in the dim glow of the street lamp, was a shadowy figure. Tall, still, watching her. She couldn't see his face, but she knew. It was him. Liana grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed Renzo, who was asleep on the couch. Someone's outside, she whispered. Renzo jumped up immediately, running to her room. But by the time he reached the window, the figure was gone. They called the police. The officers arrived quickly but found no sign of an intruder. No footprints in the snow, no forced entry. Renzo stayed up for the rest of the night, his hand gripping a kitchen knife. Liana barely slept. She felt like the walls were closing in. And then at dawn, she heard a soft rustling noise outside her door. She froze. Slowly, she crept to the peephole and held her breath. A small white envelope lay on the floor. Renzo woke up when she gasped. "What?" he asked, alarmed. Liana picked up the envelope and ripped it open. This time, there were only 4 words. "Check your closet. Now." Renzo grabbed a bat from under the couch and nodded at Liana. She held her breath as he yanked the closet door open. Empty. First. But then Renzo bent down, frowning. "What the?" Liana looked over his shoulder and felt the blood drain from her face. Inside, on the carpeted floor, was a small pillow. The indentation on it suggested someone had been sitting there, watching, waiting. Liana's stomach churned. How long had he been in there? The police arrived again, searching the apartment. But there was no sign of forced entry. No fingerprints. It was like a ghost had passed through. The final straw came when Liana's landlord checked the building's security cameras. There was no footage of anyone entering her apartment. But there was something worse. At exactly 2:45 a.m., a hooded figure walked down the hallway, smiling directly into the camera. He then held up a key. Liana's apartment key. He waved at the camera before vanishing down the hall. The police took everything seriously now. They changed Liana's locks, set up security, and promised to increase patrols. But deep down, she knew he would come back. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next proposed day. But someday. And when he did, he wouldn't be asking anymore. Story 3: The Disappearing Fiancé. The day Avellini got engaged was the happiest of her life. She and her boyfriend, Callum, had been together for 3 years, and she had known from the very beginning that he was the one. He was kind, patient, and had this quiet, steady way of loving her that made her feel safe. That proposed day, he took her to the lakeside cabin where they had spent their first trip together. Snow dusted the trees, and the water was frozen solid, shimmering under the pale winter sun. As they stood on the dock, Callum knelt, pulled out a ring, and smiled up at her. "Avellini Moore," he said, "will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They kissed, and Callum slipped the ring onto her finger. Fit perfectly. That night, as they lay in bed, Avellini whispered, "I can't wait to spend forever with you." Callum kissed her forehead. "Forever," he murmured. By morning, he was gone. At first, Avellini thought it was a joke. Maybe he had gone out to get breakfast. Maybe he was setting up some surprise. But the cabin was silent. His shoes were still by the door. His jacket still hung on the hook. His phone sat on the nightstand, the screen dark. Avellini's stomach tightened. "Callum," she called. No answer. She checked every room, growing more frantic. The bathroom, the small kitchen, even outside, though the snow was untouched. No footprints leading away from the cabin. It was like he had vanished. Panic set in. She called the police. "How long has he been missing?" the dispatcher asked. "Since last night, no, this morning." "I don't know. He was here when we went to bed." The police arrived within an hour, combing through the cabin. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no footprints. Just a man who had proposed the night before and then ceased to exist. Back home, Avellini refused to give up. She called Callum's friends, his family, his work, anyone who might know where he had gone. The responses were all the same. "Who? Callum? I don't know a Callum." "Avellini, are you okay? You've never mentioned a fiancé before." The world seemed to tilt. Avellini dug through her phone. His number gone. Every text, every picture, erased. Their photos on her social media? Deleted. Their trip to Paris last year? Missing. His clothes, his toothbrush, his favorite mug at her apartment gone. Every trace of him had been wiped away, as if he had never existed. But Avellini knew he had. The ring on her finger was proof, right? With trembling hands, she pulled it off and checked the engraving inside. C+A = forever. She had not imagined him. Desperate, Avellini searched public records, old emails, anything that could prove Callum was real. She finally found something. A blurry, old newspaper clipping. February 14th, 1985. Local man disappears after proposing. Fiancé claims he vanished without a trace. Avellini's breath caught. She skimmed the article. A woman, Genevieve Lawson, had reported her fiancé, Thomas Wren, missing on proposed day. The details were eerily similar. A lakeside cabin, a ring, a morning where the man simply ceased to exist. She looked deeper. There were other stories. Every few decades, a man would disappear in the same way on the same day, always after proposing. And the women left behind, their stories were dismissed as delusions, grief, or hysteria. Avellini's hands shook. Was this some kind of curse? A new thought sent a chill down her spine. She ran to her jewelry box, grabbed a magnifying glass, and examined the ring. She hadn't noticed it before. The engraving inside the band was deeper than it should have been, like it had been carved over and over, worn down by time, like it had belonged to someone else, maybe many others. That night, Avellini returned to the lake. She stood on the dock, the icy wind biting at her skin. "Callum," she called. "If you're here, if you can hear me, please, I need to know what happened." Silence. Then, just as she turned to leave, a whisper. "Avellini," she gasped, spinning around. The surface of the frozen lake was shifting, darkness swirling beneath the ice. Shapes moved beneath it. Shadows of men, faces blurred, hands pressing against the ice as if trying to break free. And there, among them, Callum. Her breath hitched. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes were full of desperation. She dropped to her knees, pressing her hands to the ice. "I'll get you out," she sobbed. But as soon as her fingertips touched the surface, the ice cracked. A deep, low voice whispered around her. "Forever means forever, Avellini." A violent gust of wind slammed into her, knocking her backward. When she looked up again, the shadows were gone. The ice was still. Callum was nowhere to be seen. The only thing left was the ring, lying on the frozen dock. The next morning, Avellini left the lake behind, but she knew the truth now. Callum hadn't just disappeared. He had been taken. And somewhere, sometime, maybe years from now, the ring would find its way to another woman. And the cycle would begin again. Story 4: The Mannequin Bride. Nadia had never believed in ghosts. She worked as a visual merchandiser at an upscale bridal boutique, spending her days dressing mannequins in elegant wedding gowns, adjusting veils, and ensuring the showroom looked perfect. The boutique, Eternel Bridal, was housed in a historic building that had been standing since the 1800s. It was rumored to be haunted, but Nadia had always laughed off the stories. Until the week leading up to propose day. That was when the mannequin in the display window started to move. It started with small things. One morning, Nadia arrived to find the mannequin, nicknamed Lucille by the staff, tilted ever so slightly, as if it had been nudged forward. She frowned. Did someone bump into it? Her coworker, Mira, shook her head. "I locked up last night. Everything was perfect when I left." Shrugging, Nadia adjusted Lucille back into position and went about her work. But the next morning, the mannequin's veil was missing. And the day after that, its head was turned slightly, as though watching her. Still, Nadia brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe the fabric had slipped. Maybe the air conditioning had shifted it. Then came the note. It was tucked beneath the mannequin's gloved hand, written on aged, yellowed paper. "I do." Nadia's unease grew. She asked Mira if anyone else had access to the boutique at night. Mira swore only the manager had the keys. That evening, determined to prove there was a logical explanation, Nadia volunteered to close up alone. She locked the doors, turned off the lights, and waited in the darkness. Hours passed. The only sounds were the soft ticking of the antique clock and the faint hum of traffic outside. Then, a soft rustling. Nadia's breath caught. She turned toward the display window. Lucille had moved. The mannequin, once standing straight, was now tilted forward, its hollow, painted eyes staring directly at her. Her pulse pounded. Slowly, she approached it. A cold draft brushed against her skin. Then, in the dim light, she saw it. Lucille's hand had changed. Before, the mannequin's fingers had been sculpted into a delicate, poised position. But now its fingers were curled inward, like it was holding something. A wedding ring. One that hadn't been there before. A chill ran down Nadia's spine. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay. She pried the ring from the mannequin's hand, her fingers trembling. Inside the band, an engraving for Beatrice. February 13th, 1925. Nadia's blood ran cold. She spent the night researching. What she found made her stomach turn. In 1925, a woman named Beatrice Laurent had been murdered in this very boutique. Back then, Eternelle Bridal had been a dress shop owned by her fiancé, Victor Moreau. On the eve of their wedding, proposed day, Victor had discovered Beatrice had planned to leave him. Furious, he had strangled her with her own veil. The next morning, when customers arrived, they found Beatrice posed in the display window, dressed in her wedding gown, a porcelain smile painted onto her lifeless face. Victor had vanished. Some claimed he fled. Others whispered that Beatrice's spirit had taken him. The boutique was sold, passed from owner to owner. Strange happenings were reported. Employees spoke of whispers, flickering lights, and the mannequin that moved on its own. And every proposed day, without fail, Lucille would shift. As if waiting, Nadia's hands shook as she reread the article. She glanced at the mannequin, now standing eerily still. Had she awakened something? Or had something been watching all along? That night, Nadia made a decision. She grabbed the ring and returned to the boutique. Standing before Lucille, she whispered, "Beatrice, if you're still here, I'm sorry." The lights flickered. The air turned ice cold. With a deep breath, Nadia knelt and placed the ring at the mannequin's feet. A moment of silence. Then, ever so slightly, Lucille tilted backward. The air warmed. The shadows in the boutique softened. For the first time in nearly a century, Beatrice Laurent was at peace. The next morning, Lucille was exactly where she belonged. No shifts, no movements. The mannequin never moved again. But every proposed day, customers still pause by the display window, drawn in by something they can't quite explain.